Is anybody familiar with the 7 principles? Critical control points, as everybody knows those. When we talk about implementing ERM, it seems like it's overwhelming. And I'm going to tell you right now, and you'll see this in later slides, fact is you have to go slowly. You just can't wake up one day and say, hey, ERM, we're compliant, check. You know, it doesn't work like that. It's a process. So, you know, we put things into, in order to manage it, we have to put things into stages and steps. And so when I was looking at the 7 principles and thinking about how companies can relate to ERM, this is the perfect example because we're really talking about starting with a really simple step of, not simple, but very critical step of looking at the hazard analysis, conducting that analysis, and going all the way through from identifying your risk to understanding how you're going to handle that risk, and then monitoring it and continually ensuring that it's working as intended, the controls are working as intended. So if you're talking about frameworks and implementing something, if you're familiar with this, this is going to be similar to what you would do on an ERM implementation. So it's really tying in this step-by-step approach. You just don't take a big blob of ERM and do it together. You do it in steps, you do it in phases. And so the 7 principles are maybe something you can relate to and understand that there are these steps that ERM will follow a very similar pattern. And we're going to talk about kind of how to implement here. So what are the benefits of ERM? I think when people talk about internal control, especially in the era of Sarbanes-Oxley, they hear that it's costly, it's time-consuming, there's not much value out of it. You know, consultants speak value add, right? I mean, that's what you're going to get out of internal controls. ERM as a whole has a number of benefits, and obviously the first one is identifying and preventing any risky activity from happening. On the food industry side, obviously, unsanitary items or something where a consumer gets sick. If it goes public, that's the worst case scenario, obviously. You want to prevent that. And that's a pretty obvious one. The other thing that we really see as a benefit is the communication and breaking down of silos. Silos is a term where you have departments or you have divisions where people are not talking amongst each other. We see it a lot. There's a company that I work for. I do internal control work for them. And we have an ERM team that we brought together. It was the first time a lot of these people had met. It's only 300 people within the organization, not that large, one office, one single building. They all got together, they were introducing themselves, and they were talking in ways that they had never talked before. I'll give some examples a little bit later on, but it was basically information sharing, idea sharing that we had never seen before. And they were really coming up with some interesting ideas when they were trying to figure out the best way to implement proper internal controls and obviously reduce the risk. So we break down those silos because what your ERM does is it brings together a team process. You're pulling people from all over the organization, putting them on a team to address the problems that you identify, but it's really breaking down those silos, which is impressive. You're identifying redundant processes and controls. We see that a lot. The best example I have is another ERM project I was on. This company had a system report that was generated but required a lot of manual work. So there's 3 separate departments that were taking the same report and had 3 separate people that were doing things to it, but at the end of the day the report looked very similar. So here you had 3 people doing basically the exact same thing, but they didn't know it because there wasn't the communication. So we're breaking down those silos. They were communicating. They said, oh, why don't we just have one person do it? So there's a couple benefits from that. Number one, you reduce the amount of work that one person had, that 3 people were doing, now you got it down to 1. Additionally, you're reducing your risk that the report's wrong. So it's a lot of manual work around that report to get it to the numbers that you need. Well, now you have one central person that's doing it, so they're going to repeat it over and over again. You don't risk turnover, you don't risk 3 separate people doing things differently. So as a result, we had one person doing it and multiple people reviewing it. And so if anything was fishy in there, they would be able to find it. And that was really an impressive thing that I saw, really breaking down those silos, improving the way that they do their process. And you know, the report's still the same, it's just one person's doing it. This is very common, especially nowadays. We're seeing a lot of, after Y2K, a lot of people spent, or before Y2K, a lot of people spent a lot of money improving their systems, upgrading them. They saw it as a good time to do it. Now we're at the kind of the point where people need upgrades to the systems. We're finding that A lot of the systems aren't doing what people need. Obviously, if you've just gone through a big system implementation, you're less concerned with that, but a lot of older IT systems are not providing the information that we need, and this is a good way where we're really identifying the needs. And it helps when we're ready to make the move to a new system. A group like this, ERM, helps identify what needs the company has. Also, you learn new functions. I didn't know they could do that. I didn't know we could have proper segregation of duties. I didn't know we could run that report, or I didn't even know the report was being run, but nobody was looking at it. So we see a lot of that as well. That's very common about learning about your IT system that you didn't know about. And then the last point, benefits of ERM, is it brings your advisors, your board, it gets them talking about risk. Fraud and risk, boards love talking about. You know, they'll talk about it all day. It's really brainstorming, and so they really have a new participation within the organization. They really like it, and so ERM is one way to jumpstart, you know, their involvement in your organization. So getting started with ERM. You know, we talked about the 7 principles. Those are great. That's a nice methodology to follow, and we're going to talk about risk assessment here. It's kind of the starting point, but it's a long-term project. Like I said, you just don't wake up one day and say, I have ERM in place. It's great. You know, just understand it's long-term. When you're talking about putting a team together, and the one hurdle that I see with ERM is that you don't have the proper people in place, that the people aren't focused on that as well, and it's not a priority to them. So getting the right players, identifying the key personnel to participate is critical to this project. Just like the 7 principles, have clearly defined points of stopping and starting. Have milestones. Understand where you're going to be, when you're going to be there, and make sure that somebody's holding you to that. And then, obviously, the first thing you need to do is start somewhere. And you just don't start and say, okay, we're going to document everything, and we're just going to get internal controls in place. It's too cloudy. You can't figure out where to start. So the best thing to do is understand what are your highest risks. You don't want to document everything. You don't want to look at internal controls everywhere, because that's really just adding to the bureaucracy, the internal control madness that's out there. And that's what Sarbanes-Oxley was doing in the early years. We were just looking at everything. My favorite example is I had a large $3 billion manufacturer out here in Chicago as a client, and revenue was certainly in scope. And we looked at revenue, and we did all the documentation around it, and the audit firm, we were the consultants, the audit firm came in and said, you didn't look at all the revenue. We said, sure we did. He said, well, they have a shop in back that they're selling, and they might do $100,000 a year out of the shop, and they wanted us to do the document the internal controls around it. So that was kind of the madness of Sarbanes-Oxley. You know, it represented such a small percentage of any revenue that they have, but for some reason they want us to look at it. ERM doesn't do that. It says, what are the riskiest areas? Let's focus on that. So when you're talking about risk within your organization, remember the 4 components, or the 4 objectives? We have compliance. So OSHA is certainly a compliance issue that we look at. These are just some examples. On the operation side, we look at packaging. Order fulfillment on the financial reporting side. And then obviously strategic is that other ERM component here that we talk about IT purchasing. And what I mean by IT purchasing is it doesn't just mean how it's approved and stuff like that. It's aligning what you purchase on your IT side with your business objectives. So where does your business want to be? Remember I talked about that? I want to be number 2 in the industry. Well, if you need to purchase IT systems to get there, then you need to understand what systems you need in place. So if the IT group is doing something completely different from what your executive group or what your marketing group is doing, then you're not getting the most out of your organization. So ERM is saying that's a risk. If your IT purchasing is way off and you're doing something else than the business is going, that's a risk to your organization, because you're not going to meet your objectives because the IT systems won't be there. So what the risk assessment does is it provides a roadmap to your ERM compliance, or to your ERM project. And it understands how we're going to mitigate the risks to the organization.